What happens when two strangers are forced to marry out of duty and discover a hunger neither of them expected? Cole Walker, a ruthless CEO with ice in his veins, never imagined his contract bride would completely unravel him. Isabel Monroe walked into his life trembling in white lace, but that night when he discovered her secret, everything changed. His control shattered, his defenses crumbled, and what began as an obligation ignited into obsession. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing you stories that move you. The smell of white lilies filled every corner of the Walker mansion, but it couldn't disguise the ice that permeated the air. Cole Walker adjusted his Italian silk tie in front of the tall mirror in his room, his fingers firm, precise, as if he were about to close another billion-dollar deal. But he wasn't. It was his wedding day, and he hated every second of it. The reflection staring back at him was that of a man who had learned to control everything: companies, rivals, emotions, everything except the destiny his family had mapped out for him. Isabel Monroe. The name sounded strange in his mind, almost artificial. He had only seen her 3 times before that day, 3 formal meetings orchestrated by lawyers and patriarchs hungry for alliances. She was beautiful, he couldn't deny that, but beauty was superficial, and marriage contracts cold as steel. He took a deep breath, his jaw locked. He knew that in a few minutes he would have to climb those stairs and face the woman who now carried his last name. The woman his family had chosen. Not for love, not for desire, but for convenience. On the other side of the bridal suite door, Isabel Monroe held onto her wedding dress as if it were her only anchor in the middle of a stormy sea. Her hands trembled, and she pressed her lips together to contain the tears that threatened to escape. The dress was beautiful, French lace, delicate embroidery, a train that seemed to float, but it weighed like chains. She didn't love this man. She barely knew him. But her family had given her no choice. No fortune, no options, no voice. You're going to marry him, Isabel, and you're going to do it with your head held high. Her mother's words echoed like a sentence. The sound of firm footsteps in the hallway made her heart race. He was coming. Cole Walker, the ruthless CEO, the man who, according to the newspapers, never smiled. The man with grey eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything and everyone. The door opened, and Isabel's world narrowed. Cole entered the room with his shirt unbuttoned at the top, his tie already hanging loose around his neck. His scent, wood, leather, and something slightly citrus, invaded the space before he even said a word. His eyes, cold and penetrating, examined her from head to toe. Slowly, intensely, as if he were evaluating an acquisition. Isabel was sitting on the edge of the bed, the dress still clinging to her body, her hair falling in golden waves over her bare shoulders. She didn't dare move. She didn't dare breathe too loudly. The silence between them pulsed. It wasn't empty, it was thick, heavy, electric. Cole approached, his steps firm on the marble floor. He stopped just inches from her. The heat from his body was almost suffocating. Isabel could feel the intensity of his gaze burning her skin, as if he were reading every thought, every fear, every secret she was trying to hide. He raised his hand, slowly, almost hesitantly, and touched a strand of her hair, tucking it behind her ear. The touch was light, but the impact was devastating. Isabel felt a shiver run up her spine. "Are you ready to begin your new life of lies?" Cole asked, his voice deep, loaded with sarcasm. But his eyes said something else. Isabel swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She wouldn't bow down. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. "And you?" she replied, her voice trembling but defiant. "Are you ready to live a charade for the rest of your life?" Cole's lips curved into a bitter smile, but he didn't respond. Instead, he took a step back, loosening his tie even more and tossing it onto a nearby armchair. He walked to the bar built into the wall, pouring himself a whiskey. The sound of liquid falling into the crystal glass was the only noise in the room for long seconds. Isabel watched him, her eyes glued to his movements. There was something disturbingly attractive about the way he moved. Confident, dominant, almost predatory. She hated to admit it, but she felt something stirring inside her. Something that shouldn't be there. Were you expecting flowers? Declarations? Cole turned to her, glass in hand, his eyes fixed. "This is a business arrangement, Isabel, nothing more. I know that," she replied, her voice firmer now. "I don't expect anything from you." He took a long sip of whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good. Then we're on the same page." But something in the way he looked at her said otherwise. There was hunger there, anger, curiosity, restrained desire. Cole placed the glass on the table and walked back to her, his steps slow, deliberate. He stopped right in front of her, so close that Isabel could feel his breath brushing against her face. "But since we're stuck with each other," he murmured, his voice low, almost a growl, "maybe we should at least try to make this bearable." Isabel lifted her chin, her eyes shining with defiance. "And how do you suggest we do that?" Cole tilted his head, his eyes dropping to her lips. For a moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. Her heart raced. But he didn't. Instead, he pulled back slightly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "I'm still deciding," he said, his voice husky. "But one thing I know, you're not what I expected." Isabel frowned. "And what were you expecting?" "A doll, submissive, easy to ignore." She felt anger boil inside her. "Sorry to disappoint you." Cole let out a low laugh, almost genuine. "I didn't say I was disappointed." And then he stepped away, grabbing the jacket thrown over the chair. "Get some rest," he said without looking back. "Tomorrow we start performing for the world." The door closed behind him, and Isabel was left alone, her heart beating erratically, her hands still trembling. But not from fear. From something far more dangerous, something she couldn't name. Not yet. Morning arrived wrapped in golden mist, rays of sunlight filtering through the velvet curtains of the bridal suite, like curious fingers trying to reveal secrets. Isabel woke alone in the king-size bed, Cole's side untouched, the sheets still perfectly stretched. He hadn't slept there. And for some reason she couldn't explain, that bothered her more than it should have. She got up, her bare feet touching the cold marble floor, and walked to the window. Outside, the Walker Mansion gardens stretched out like a private kingdom, sculpted stone fountains, impeccably pruned rose bushes, stone paths winding toward an artificial lake. Everything seemed perfect, controlled, lifeless, exactly like her marriage. The sound of a door opening made her turn abruptly. Cole entered, wearing dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms marked by veins that traced paths beneath his tanned skin. He was holding a cup of coffee, steam rising in lazy spirals. His eyes met hers, and for an instant, Isabel felt the air leave her lungs. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice neutral, but his eyes attentive, almost invasive. "Better than I expected," she lied, lifting her chin. Cole gave a half smile, as if he knew exactly that she was lying. He walked to the center table and placed the cup there, his long fingers sliding along the porcelain edge. There was something hypnotic about the way he moved. Precise, confident, dangerously controlled. "Good," he said, sitting in the leather armchair across from the bed, his legs spread, his arms resting on his knees. "Because today our public performance begins. My family expects us to show up at brunch, together, smiling." Isabel crossed her arms, feeling the thin fabric of her nightgown brush against her skin. "And if I don't want to smile?" Cole's eyes darkened. "Then pretend. That's what we're both going to do from now on, isn't it?" She looked away, anger simmering beneath the surface. She hated this. Hated being treated like a commodity. Hated that he was right. Cole stood and walked toward her, his steps silent, feline. He stopped just inches away, and Isabel felt his heat enveloping her like a wave. He raised his hand and with his fingertips lightly touched her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Are you good at pretending, Isabel?" he asked, his voice low, almost a hoarse whisper. She swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on his. Grey, stormy, dangerous, better than you think. Cole tilted his head, his lips almost touching hers, but not quite. His breath was warm against her mouth. Isabel felt her heart race, her legs weaken. "We'll see," he murmured. And then he pulled back, leaving her there, trembling, confused, furious. He grabbed the jacket that was on the chair and headed for the door. "Get dressed, we're leaving in an hour." The door closed with a soft click. Isabel let out the air she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them against her chest, feeling her heart beating wildly. This man was dangerous, not just because he was cold and calculating, but because beneath that icy facade there was something boiling, something that threatened to consume her. Brunch at the Walker Mansion was a meticulously orchestrated event. Tables decorated with white flower arrangements, crystals gleaming in the sunlight, waiters circulating with silver trays. The city's elite was present: businessmen, politicians, socialites with sharp smiles and calculating eyes. Isabel entered arm in arm with Cole, wearing a light blue dress that hugged her curves elegantly but discreetly. She could feel the stares on her, curious, judgmental, hungry for gossip. Cole beside her was the embodiment of confidence. He greeted people with brief nods, polite smiles that didn't reach his eyes. His hand was firm on her waist, possessive, territorial. "Smile," he whispered in her ear, his voice so low only she could hear. Isabel forced a smile, but inside she was screaming. That's when she saw her. Vanessa Kingsley, tall, slender, with sleek black hair and red lips painted with surgical precision. She wore a blood-red dress that caught the attention of every man in the room, but her eyes, green as poison, were fixed on Cole. "Cole, darling," Vanessa purred, approaching with calculated steps. "What a delicious surprise to see you." "Married." The last word was spit out like an inside joke. Cole stiffened beside Isabel but maintained his neutral expression. "Vanessa," he replied, his voice cold. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for anything," Vanessa said, her eyes sliding to Isabel with barely disguised disdain. "So you're the lucky one who hooked the Iceman. That must have been difficult." Isabel felt Cole's nails dig slightly into her waist, but she held firm. "Actually, it was quite natural," Isabel replied, her voice sweet but her eyes hard. "When there's a real connection, you don't have to force it." Vanessa let out a shrill laugh. "Real connection? Honey, Cole doesn't have connections, he has contracts." She turned to Cole, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Isn't that right, darling? How long did the negotiation last? Or did she accept on the first offer?" Isabel felt humiliation burn her cheeks, but before she could respond, Cole stepped forward, placing himself partially between her and Vanessa. "Careful, Vanessa," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You're talking about my wife." Vanessa blinked, surprised. For a second, her mask of confidence slipped. "Wife," she repeated as if the word were bitter. "How convenient." Cole didn't look away. "Isabel has more class in a single glance than you have in your entire act." The silence that followed was deafening. People nearby stopped talking, turning discreetly to watch the confrontation. Vanessa forced a cutting smile. "I see the ice is melting, Cole. Be careful. That could be dangerous." And then she walked away, her heels striking hard against the marble floor. Isabel released the breath she'd been holding, her body still tense. Cole turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Are you okay?" he asked, and there was something different in his voice, something almost concerned. Isabel nodded but didn't trust her own voice. Cole intertwined his fingers with hers, firm, warm, surprisingly comforting. "Let's get out of here," he said, guiding her through the crowd. They walked to the terrace, away from the curious stares. The wind played with Isabel's hair, bringing the smell of roses and wet earth. Cole released her hand and walked to the balustrade, resting his hands on the cold stone. "Sorry about that," he said, without looking at her. Isabel approached, standing beside him. "Why?" "You defended her." He turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. "No," he corrected, his voice low. "I defended you." Isabel's heart skipped. Cole turned completely toward her, his eyes traveling over her face as if he were memorizing every detail. "I don't hate you, Isabel," he said, his voice hoarse. "What I feel is the opposite of that." And before she could process those words, he leaned in, his nose lightly brushing the side of her head. inhaling the scent of her hair. The world stopped, and Isabel knew in that moment that she was in danger. A delicious danger. Inevitable. The days following the brunch unfolded in a strange and silent dance. Cole left early for the office, returned late, and yet Isabel could feel his presence in every corner of the mansion. His scent lingered in the air, half-empty coffee cups left on the office desk, the sound of firm footsteps echoing through the hallways in the early morning hours. He was present even when absent. And Isabel found herself waiting for him, listening, watching. She hated to admit it, but something had changed after the terrace, after those words. "What I feel is the opposite of that." They echoed in her mind like a dangerous mantra, an unspoken promise that kept her awake at night, her heart racing, her skin tingling with the memory of his nose brushing against her hair. The next morning, Isabel came down for breakfast with her hair loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore a simple white linen dress that contrasted with her lightly tanned skin. It wasn't anything elaborate, but when she entered the dining room and saw Cole sitting at the head of the table, his eyes lifted and locked on her. He stopped with his cup in midair, his lips parted, his eyes slowly traveling the length of her exposed neck. Isabel felt heat rise in her cheeks, descending through her chest, spreading through her thighs. That look wasn't casual. It was hungry. "Good morning," she said, her voice coming out lower than she intended. Cole cleared his throat, setting down the cup harder than necessary. "Good morning," he replied, his voice hoarse, still heavy with sleep. Or something else. Isabel sat at the table, trying to ignore the way his eyes were still glued to her. The maid brought fresh orange juice, warm croissants, fruit cut into perfect pieces. But Isabel could barely focus on the food. All she felt was the weight of Cole's gaze. "Sleep well?" he asked, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Yes," she lied. Cole tilted his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Liar!" Isabel looked up, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because I didn't sleep either," he admitted, his voice low, almost confessional. The silence that followed was thick, loaded with unspoken things. Isabel gripped her juice glass harder than necessary, her fingers white around the glass. Cole stood up, and for a moment Isabel thought he was going to leave, but he didn't. Instead, he walked toward her slowly, his steps measured. He stopped beside her chair, so close that Isabel could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You don't need to be afraid of me," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Isabel turned her face to look at him, her eyes meeting his. Up close, she could see the details she usually missed, the fine lines around his eyes, the stubble drawing the strong line of his jaw, the way his lips were full, almost sensual, even when he wasn't smiling. "I'm not afraid of you," she replied, but her voice came out shaky, betraying her. Cole raised his hand and, with his fingers, brushed a strand of hair from her face, sliding it behind her ear. The touch was light, but it left a trail of fire on her skin. "You should be," he murmured. "Because I can't stop thinking about you." Isabel's heart exploded in erratic beats. She could barely breathe. The air between them was hot, thick, electric. Cole leaned in even closer, his face inches from hers. Isabel could feel his breath brushing her lips. She could see his pupils dilating. She could feel the heat, the hunger, the barely contained desire. "Cole," she whispered, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do. He closed his eyes for a second, as if fighting against himself, and then he pulled back, moving away from her as if she burned. "Finish your breakfast," he said, his voice tense. "I'll have the car prepared. We're going out today." "Out?" Isabel asked, still dizzy. "You're going to need new clothes, jewelry, everything a Walker wife should have." He turned, already walking toward the door. "Be ready in an hour." And then he left, leaving her alone, trembling, confused, wishing he had stayed. The store was one of the most exclusive in the city, located on an avenue where only the extremely wealthy dared to enter. Mannequins dressed in designer clothes stared from the window like silent sentinels. Isabel entered arm in arm with Cole, feeling out of place, as if she didn't belong in that world. But Cole seemed completely at ease. He greeted the manager with a brief nod and headed straight to the private fitting rooms at the back of the store. Bring everything she wants, Cole told the saleswoman sitting on a velvet sofa. And don't hold back. Isabel stood there, uncomfortable, while the saleswoman began bringing dresses, outfits, shoes, purses. Each piece was more expensive than everything Isabel had ever owned combined. Try them on, Cole said, his eyes fixed on her. Isabel took a dress and went into the fitting room. Her hands trembled as she undressed, taking off the linen dress and putting on the new one, a black silk dress that hugged every curve, highlighting her slim waist and long legs. She came out of the fitting room, unsure, her arms crossed over her stomach. Cole saw her and stopped breathing. His eyes traveled over her body slowly, from her bare feet, up her legs, her waist, her chest, until finally reaching her eyes. And what she saw there made her tremble. Desire. Pure. Undeniable. Hungry. Turn around, he said, his voice hoarse. Isabel obeyed, turning slowly. She could feel his eyes burning on every inch of her skin. Perfect, he murmured. Take that one, and try on the others. For 2 hours, Isabel tried on outfit after outfit, and each time she came out of the fitting room, she found Cole looking at her as if she were the only thing in the universe that mattered. He didn't blink, didn't look away, just watched, his eyes dark, his breathing controlled, his fingers gripping the arms of the sofa tightly. When they finally finished, the saleswoman wrapped everything up. More than 20 pieces, shoes, purses, jewelry. Cole paid without hesitation, the credit card sliding through the machine as if it were nothing. In the car on the way home, the silence was deafening. Isabel looked out the window, but she could feel his eyes on her. She could feel the tension vibrating in the air between them. Thank you, she finally said, breaking the silence. You don't need to thank me, Cole replied. You're my wife. It's my duty to take care of you. Isabel turned to face him. Is that all it is? Duty? Cole looked away, his jaw locked. No, he admitted, his voice low. It's not just that. Isabel felt her heart race. Then what is it? Cole finally looked at her, and what she saw in those grey eyes took her breath away. That was desire. It was hunger. It was something much bigger and more dangerous than any business agreement. I'm still trying to figure it out, he said, his voice hoarse. But when I do, you'll be the first to know. And Isabel knew in that moment that she was lost. Completely. Hopelessly. Lost. High society had a habit of turning charity dinners into silent war arenas. Sharp smiles hid knives, compliments came loaded with poison, and every glance was an assessment, a measure of how much power you really possessed. Isabel had learned this quickly, but knowing didn't prepare her to face it. That night, the Grand Hotel ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers that seemed to melt light over the guests. Women wore dresses that cost more than cars, men displayed watches worth houses. And in the center of it all, Cole Walker walked with Isabel at his side, his hand firm on her waist, as if he were marking territory. Isabel wore an emerald green silk dress that Cole had personally chosen that afternoon. That one, he had said, his eyes darkening when he saw her try it on. That's the right one. And now, under the ballroom lights, she understood why. The dress highlighted her eyes, molded her curves, and made every head turn when she passed. Breathe, Cole whispered in her ear, his voice low, just for her. You look beautiful, and they know it. Isabel tried to smile, but her muscles were tense. She could feel the stares, curious, envious, judgmental. The new Mrs. Walker. The girl with no fortune who had hooked the city's most coveted CEO. They sat at the main table, surrounded by influential businessmen and their perfectly polished wives. Conversations flowed about business, travel, investments. Isabel remained quiet, observing, learning the dynamics of this world that was now hers, even if she didn't feel part of it. That's when she appeared. Vanessa Kingsley glided to the table like an elegant snake, her red dress clinging to her body like a second skin. Her lips were curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She carried a champagne flute in her hand, her long, perfectly manicured fingers wrapping around the crystal. Cole, she purred, leaning over the table so that her cleavage was strategically visible. What a wonderful surprise to see you here. And with your wife. The pause before the last word was deliberate. Venomous. Cole didn't move, but Isabel felt tension radiate from his body. "Vanessa," he replied, his voice cold, cutting. "I thought you were in Paris." "I came back early," she said, her eyes sliding to Isabel with barely disguised disdain. "I couldn't miss the chance to get to know the woman who managed to melt the Iceman." Isabel forced a polite smile, but her hands were clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. Vanessa pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited, crossing her legs slowly, her eyes fixed on Cole. "You know, Cole, I still remember those dinners we used to have. Just the two of us. Intimate conversations." She took a sip of champagne, her eyes gleaming with malice. "But I imagine now you have other priorities." Isabel felt her blood boil. It wasn't jealousy. It was public humiliation. The way Vanessa treated her as if she were invisible, disposable. "Actually," Isabel said, her voice coming out firmer than she expected, "Cole has been showing me just how unforgettable, truly intimate conversations can be." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Cole turned his head to Isabel, surprised. "How sweet," Vanessa said, her voice saccharine. "But darling, innocence can be staged. Some men like that. It makes them feel powerful." Isabel felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, Cole's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Careful, Vanessa." The tone was low, dangerous, deadly. Vanessa blinked, her confidence faltering for a second. "I'm just being honest, Cole." "You always valued honesty." Cole leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers, and the air around the table seemed to cool 10 degrees. "Isabel has more class in a single glance than you have in your entire existence." His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "So, if you can't respect my wife, I suggest you find another table." The silence that followed was absolute. Conversations around them stopped. All eyes turned to them. Vanessa went pale, her lips pressing into a thin line. She forced a laugh, but it sounded fake, broken. "My God, Cole. You actually fell in love, didn't you?" She stood abruptly, the chair scraping on the marble floor. She shot one last venomous look at Isabel before walking away, her heels striking hard. Isabel released the breath she'd been holding, her body still tense. Cole turned to her and she saw something different in his eyes, something that made her tremble, concern, anger, and something deeper. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, just for her. Isabel nodded but didn't trust her own voice. Cole reached across the table and took her hand, their fingers intertwined, firm, warm, comforting. Isabel looked at their joined hands and felt something move inside her chest, something dangerous, something that felt a lot like hope. "Let's get out of here," Cole said, standing and pulling her gently. They walked through the ballroom, ignoring the curious stares, the whispers, the gossip that was already beginning to spread. Cole didn't let go of her hand for a single second. When they reached the outdoor terrace, the cold night air wrapped around Isabel like a welcome embrace. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The wind played with her hair, lifting strands that danced around her face. Cole watched her, his hands in his pockets, his jaw still tense. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "Sorry for exposing you to that." Isabel turned to face him. "You don't need to apologize. It wasn't your fault." "It was," Cole insisted, taking a step toward her. "Vanessa, she's part of my past, a mistake I made, and now you're paying for it." Isabel shook her head. "You defended her. You defended me." Cole took another step, now so close that Isabel could feel his warmth, the smell of expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely his. "Because I wasn't going to let anyone talk about you that way," he said, his voice hoarse, intense. "Not her. Not anyone." Isabel's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care?" Cole raised his hand and touched her face, his thumb sliding across her cheekbone. The touch was tender, almost reverent. "Because you're not what I thought you were," he admitted. "You're not a commodity. You're not an obligation. You're real." Isabel closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel his touch, the warmth, the truth in his words. "Cole." "I don't hate you, Isabel," he said, echoing the words he had said before. What I feel at is the opposite of that. She opened her eyes, meeting his, and in that moment, under the stars, with the wind whispering secrets around them, something changed. The wall between them began to crack, not crumble, not yet, but crack, and through the fissures, something new began to grow, something that felt very dangerously like love. Cole leaned in, his nose brushing the side of her head, inhaling the scent of her hair. Isabel felt a shiver run down her entire spine. Her hands moved instinctively, touching his chest, feeling his heart beating strong beneath his shirt. "You're trembling," he murmured against her hair. "I'm cold," she lied. Cole let out a low, hoarse laugh. Liar. And then he took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. The fabric was still warm from his body, carrying his scent. Isabel pulled the jacket tighter around herself, feeling enveloped by him. "Better?" he asked. Isabel nodded, but it wasn't the cold that made her tremble. It was him. It was the way he looked at her. It was the way he touched her. It was the way, slowly, he was becoming the only thing she could think about. And that scared her more than anything. Because what happens when you start falling in love with the man who was supposed to be just an arrangement? The days following the charity dinner brought a subtle but undeniable shift in the dynamic between Cole and Isabel. He was no longer distant, no longer cold. There was something different in the way he looked at her in the hallways, how his eyes lingered a second longer when she entered a room, how his voice softened when he spoke her name. Isabel felt as if she were walking on thin ice. Each step could break the surface and plunge her into deep and dangerous waters. But at the same time, she couldn't stop walking toward him. That afternoon, the mansion was quiet. Cole had cancelled meetings and decided to work from home. Isabel wandered through the rooms, restless, until her feet led her to the library. A vast space with dark wooden shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with rare and antique books. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, creating golden patterns on the oak floor. Isabel chose a book at random and sat on the window seat, tucking her legs beneath her. The light cotton dress rode up slightly above her knees, revealing the pale skin of her thighs. She was absorbed in reading when she heard footsteps. She looked up and saw him. Cole stood in the library entrance, his white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, the top button open revealing the base of his neck. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it several times. His eyes were fixed on her, intense, restless, hungry. "Sorry," Isabel said, moving to stand. "I didn't know you were here. I can—" "No," Cole interrupted, his voice hoarse. "Stay." He walked toward her, his steps slow, measured, like a predator approaching its prey. He stopped beside the window seat, so close that Isabel could feel the heat radiating from his body. "What are you reading?" he asked, his eyes dropping to the book in her hands. Isabel looked at the cover, trying to remember the title she'd chosen without thinking. "Persuasion," she replied, her voice coming out lower than intended. "Jane Austen." Cole's lips curved into a small smile. "Do you like stories about impossible love?" Isabel felt her heart race. "I like stories about finding beauty in the unlikely." Cole tilted his head, his eyes on her lips. The silence between them screamed with everything that wasn't being said. He raised his hand and touched the book's cover, but didn't take it. His fingers brushed hers, and Isabel felt an electric current run through her body. "And do you find beauty in the unlikely?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Isabel looked into his eyes, grey, stormy, filled with something she couldn't name. "Sometimes," she whispered, "when I least expect it." Cole held her fingers more firmly, intertwining them with his. The book slipped to the side, forgotten. Isabel couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All that existed was his touch, his warmth, his eyes. "Isabel," he murmured, leaning closer. "Yes?" She could barely form the word. "I'm trying to control myself," he admitted, his voice tense. "But you're not making it easy." Isabel felt her entire body tingle. "Maybe I don't want you to control yourself." Cole's eyes darkened. He released her hand, and before she could process what was happening, he pulled her up, making her stand before him. His hands found her waist, firm, possessive. "You need to be sure of what you're saying," he said, his voice hoarse, almost a growl. Isabel raised her hands and placed them on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong, erratic. "I'm sure." Cole closed his eyes for a second, as if fighting an internal battle. And then he leaned in, his face so close that Isabel could feel his breath brushing her lips. But he didn't kiss her. Not yet. "If I kiss you now," he whispered, "I won't be able to stop." Isabel gripped his shirt, her fingers closing on the fabric. "Then don't stop." And that was all Cole needed to hear. He kissed her. And it wasn't gentle. It was urgent, hungry, desperate. His lips captured hers with an intensity that took the air from Isabel's lungs. His hands rose to her face, holding her as if she were precious, as if he were afraid she would disappear. Isabel melted against him, her hands sliding to the back of his neck, her fingers burying themselves in his hair. The kiss deepened, and she felt the world around them disappear. There was no more mansion, no more contracts, no more obligations. There was only Cole, only this. He pressed her against the bookshelf, his body covering hers, and Isabel felt the heat, the strength, the pure desire radiating from him. His hands descended down her back, gripping, pulling her even closer. "You're driving me crazy," he murmured against her lips, his voice hoarse, broken. "Good," Isabel whispered, her eyes still closed. "Now we're even." Cole let out a low, hoarse laugh and kissed her again, this time slower, savoring, exploring every inch of her lips as if it were the first and last time. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Cole rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his hands still holding her waist, as if he couldn't let her go. "This changes everything," he said, his voice low. Isabel opened her eyes, her fingers still intertwined in his hair. "I know." Cole pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes. And what she saw there made her tremble. It wasn't just desire, it was something bigger, deeper, more frightening. "I didn't plan this," he admitted, his voice vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. "I didn't plan to feel this way about you." Isabel touched his face, her thumb caressing the strong line of his jaw. "I didn't either." Cole held her hand against his face, turning his head to kiss her palm. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, that Isabel felt tears prick her eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cole pulled her into an embrace, wrapping her completely in his arms. Isabel rested her head on his chest, listening to his heart beating strong, fast, alive. "We stop fighting," he whispered against her hair, "and see where this takes us." Isabel closed her eyes, allowing herself for the first time to imagine a different future. A future where this marriage wasn't just a contract, where Cole wasn't just a duty, where love, that dangerous and unlikely word, could be possible. They stayed there, embraced in the library, while the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And for the first time since it all began, Isabel felt something she didn't expect to feel. Peace, hope, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something real, something worth fighting for, something worth risking breaking for, because when you find beauty in the unlikely, you don't let it go, no matter the cost. The entire city was talking about the Walker Foundation's annual gala ball, an event that brought together the country's most powerful elite for a night of ostentation, networking, and silent competition for status. For Cole, it was just another social obligation, but for Isabel, it was the first time she would be officially presented as Mrs. Walker before hundreds of judging eyes. And she was terrified. "Breathe," Cole said, watching her from across the room as she got ready. He was already dressed, impeccable in a black tuxedo that seemed to have been designed specifically to highlight his broad shoulders and confident posture. "You're going to look beautiful, like always." Isabel looked at her reflection in the mirror. The dress Cole had chosen for her was a deep blue, almost the color of midnight, with a V neckline that descended elegantly but boldly. The silk fabric hugged every curve of her body, and the side slit revealed a glimpse of her leg when she moved. Her hair was pulled up in a loose bun, with some strands falling strategically around her face. Diamond earrings, a gift from Cole, sparkled under the light. She looked like a princess. but felt like an imposter. "What if I say something wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if they realize I don't belong in that world?" Cole crossed the room in 3 long strides. He stopped behind her, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. His hands landed on her shoulders, firm, warm, comforting. "You belong anywhere I am," he said, his voice low but loaded with conviction. "And if anyone dares suggest otherwise, they'll have to deal with me." Isabel turned to face him, and her heart melted at the intensity in his eyes. He wasn't just saying empty words. He believed it, and somehow that made her believe it too. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole leaned in and kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender that she felt her eyes burn. "Let's show them who you really are," he murmured, "the woman who swept me off my feet." The ballroom had been transformed into a dark fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceiling like fallen stars, illuminating the space with a soft, golden light. Tables decorated with white rose arrangements and scented candles surrounded the marble dance floor. Classical music played live, performed by a full orchestra positioned on a raised stage. When Cole and Isabel entered, all eyes turned. Isabel felt the weight of the stairs, curious, envious, calculating, but Cole kept his hand firm on her waist, guiding her through the crowd with the confidence of someone who owned the world. "You look stunning," a female voice said. Isabel turned and found an older woman, elegant, with a warm smile. "Mrs. Walker, it's a pleasure to officially meet you. I'm Margaret Hastings." Isabel smiled, relieved to find a friendly face. "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Hastings. Call me Margaret, dear, and may I say that Cole has never looked so human." She shot a knowing look at Cole, who just smiled slightly. The hours passed in a blur of polite conversations, endless introductions and toasts. Isabel began to relax, allowing herself to enjoy the evening. But it was when the music changed, a slow, romantic waltz, that Cole turned to her and extended his hand. "Dance with me." Isabel looked at his hand, her heart racing. "I don't know how to waltz." "I'll teach you," he said, with a small but genuine smile. She placed her hand in his, and he led her to the center of the dance floor. His hands found their position, one on her waist, the other holding her hand. Isabel placed her free hand on his shoulder, feeling the tense muscles beneath the fabric of his tuxedo. "Follow me," Cole whispered, and began to move. Isabel stumbled through the first steps, but Cole held her firm, guiding her patiently. Slowly, she began to understand the rhythm, to feel the music, to move in sync with him. And then, something magical happened. They weren't just dancing anymore. They were floating. Cole pulled her closer until there was no space between them. His hand descended down her bare back, his fingers sliding across the exposed skin, leaving a trail of fire. Isabel gasped softly, her eyes meeting his. "Cole," she whispered. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice hoarse, his eyes fixed on hers. "So beautiful it hurts to look at you." Isabel felt the world around them disappear. There were no more hundreds of people watching. No more music. There was only them. Cole tilted his head, his face so close that she could feel his breath brushing her lips. Her heart beat so hard she was sure he could hear it. And then someone interrupted. "May I steal your wife for a dance, Walker?" The voice was smooth but loaded with intention. Cole stiffened, his eyes narrowing. Isabel turned and saw a tall man with dark hair and an arrogant smile. She didn't know him, but something about him made her feel immediate discomfort. "No," Cole replied, his voice cold, cutting. "You may not." The man let out a laugh. "Come on, Walker, just one dance. It won't hurt, will it?" Cole took a step forward, placing himself partially between Isabel and the man. His posture was rigid, threatening. I said no. The air around them grew tense. People nearby began to notice, turning to watch the confrontation. The man raised his hands in surrender, but the smile didn't leave his face. "Easy, friend. I didn't mean to offend. I was just trying to be polite." "Then be polite somewhere else," Cole said, his voice low, dangerous. "Away from my wife." The man took a step back, still smiling, but his eyes gleamed with something dark. He looked at Isabel one last time before walking away. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Walker. I'm sure we'll see each other again." And then he disappeared into the crowd. Isabel released the breath she'd been holding, her body still tense. Cole turned to her, his hands rising to hold her face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for signs of damage. "I am," she replied, touching his chest. "But you were different." Cole closed his eyes for a second, his jaw still locked. "I didn't like the way he looked at you." Isabel felt something warm spread through her chest. "Jealous, Mr. Walker?" Cole opened his eyes, and what she saw there made her tremble. It was possessiveness. It was hunger. It was something primitive, instinctive. "Yes," he admitted without hesitation, "jealous. Because you're mine, Isabel. My wife. And I don't share." The words should have sounded possessive, maybe even frightening, but all Isabel felt was an intense warmth, a deep certainty that she was exactly where she should be. "I don't want to belong to anyone else," she whispered. Cole pulled her close, wrapping her in an embrace that felt both protective and desperate. "Good," he murmured against her hair, "because I'm never letting you go." And there, in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by hundreds of people, they held each other as if they were the only ones in the world. Because maybe they were, at least in that moment, and maybe that was all that mattered. The rain began in the middle of the night, beating against the mansion windows like impatient fingers wanting to get in. Isabel lay in bed, unable to sleep, watching the patterns the water drew on the glass illuminated by distant lightning. The ball had ended hours ago, but her body still vibrated with the memory of Cole's touch, the way he held her, the intensity in his eyes when he said she was his. She got up, wearing only a light silk nightgown that brushed her thighs, and walked to the window. Outside, through the curtain of rain, she saw a figure in the garden. Her heart raced when she recognized Cole standing in the storm, completely soaked, his arms at his sides, his face lifted to the sky as if he were defying the world. Without thinking, Isabel ran. She descended the stairs, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She opened the back door and stepped into the night, the rain beating against her skin, cold and invigorating. She ran across the wet lawn to him. "Cole!" she shouted over the sound of the storm. He turned, his eyes widening when he saw her. In 3 long strides he was before her, his hands gripping her shoulders. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice hoarse but concerned. "You're going to catch cold." "And you?" she replied, rain streaming down her face, mixing with what could have been tears. "What are you doing out here?" Cole didn't answer. He just looked at her, his eyes dark, intense, filled with something she couldn't name. His white shirt was plastered to his body, transparent from the water, revealing the contours of his chest muscles. His hair was stuck to his forehead, drops of rain sliding down his strong jaw. "I was thinking about you," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I can't stop thinking about you." Isabel's heart exploded in erratic beats. She took a step forward, her hands rising to touch his face, feeling the cold, wet skin beneath her fingers. "Then stop fighting," she whispered. "Stop resisting." Cole closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "You don't understand," he murmured. "If I stop fighting, if I let myself feel everything I'm feeling, there's no going back." Isabel moved even closer until their bodies touched, wet, warm, vibrating. "Then don't go back," she said, her voice firm, determined. "I don't want you to." Cole's eyes opened, and what she saw there took her breath away. It was desire. It was fear. It was surrender. It was everything. He held her face with both hands, his thumbs caressing her cheekbones. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice broken. "Because if I take you now, if I make you truly mine, I'll never be able to let you go." Isabel smiled through the tears and rain. "I don't want you to let me go." And that was all Cole needed to hear. He kissed her under the storm, his lips capturing hers with a desperate, urgent, uncontrollable hunger. Isabel melted against him, her hands sliding to the back of his neck, pulling him closer, deeper. The kiss was wet, wild, perfect. Cole picked her up in his arms, lifting her off the ground, and she wrapped her legs around his waist. He walked through the rain, climbing the steps back to the mansion, never breaking the kiss. Inside, he carried her up the stairs, straight to his room. Not the bridal suite they had shared in name only, but his private space, where no one else had ever entered. He set her on her feet beside the bed, his eyes traveling over every inch of her. The silk nightgown was plastered to her body, transparent from the water, revealing every curve, every line. Cole swallowed hard, his eyes darkening. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice hoarse, almost reverent. Isabel raised her hands and slowly pulled the wet nightgown over her head, letting it fall to the floor. She stood completely naked before him, vulnerable but unafraid, because it was Cole. And she trusted him. His eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. He took a step forward, his hands trembling slightly as they reached her waist. "Isabel," he whispered, as if her name were a prayer. She touched his chest, feeling his heart beating strong, wild. "Your turn," she said softly. Cole removed his wet shirt, revealing his defined torso, tanned skin, scars that told stories she didn't yet know. Isabel slid her hands over his chest, feeling the muscles contract beneath her touch. He closed his eyes, his breathing coming in short bursts. "You're killing me," he murmured. Isabel smiled, rising on her toes to kiss his jaw, his neck, his collarbone. "Good way to die," she whispered against his skin. Cole let out a sound that was half laugh, half groan. Then he picked her up again, laying her gently on the bed. He positioned himself over her, his arms on either side of her head, holding his own weight. His eyes met hers, and there was a silent question there. "Yes," Isabel whispered, answering before he even asked. "Yes, Cole. I want you." He kissed her again, this time slower, savoring. His hands explored her body, sliding over her arms, her waist, her hips, as if he were memorizing every inch. Isabel arched against him, her hands running over his back, feeling the tense muscles, the warm skin. "I've never done this before," she whispered against his lips. Cole stopped, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. "I know," he said softly, "and I'm going to take care of you. I promise." And he kept his promise. Every touch was tender but intense. Every kiss was deep but careful. He explored her slowly, discovering what made her gasp, what made her tremble, what made her whisper his name like a plea. And when they finally joined, when their bodies became one, Isabel felt something break inside her, not from pain, but from pure, absolute, overwhelming emotion. Cole held her face, his eyes fixed on hers the entire time. "You're mine," he whispered, his voice hoarse, broken. "You always were?" "From the first moment." Isabel touched his face, tears sliding down her temples. "And you're mine," she replied. They moved together, slowly at first, then with more urgency, lost in each other, in the pleasure, in the connection that was so deep it seemed to transcend the physical. And when the climax came, it was devastating. A wave that swept them away together, leaving them breathless, trembling, completely undone. Cole collapsed beside her, pulling her into his arms, wrapping her completely. Isabel rested her head on his chest, listening to his heart beating strong, gradually slowing. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his fingers caressing her hair. "Better than okay," she whispered. "I'm complete." Cole kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. "I love you," he said, and the words came out as if they'd been torn from the depths of his soul. "I know I shouldn't. I know this wasn't part of the plan, but I love you, Isabel, more than I knew it was possible to love someone." Isabel felt her heart explode. She rose on her elbow, looking into his eyes, vulnerable, honest, filled with love. "I love you too," she whispered, "from the moment you stopped fighting against me. Against us." Cole pulled her into a long, deep kiss, full of promises, and when they finally separated, he held her tight as if afraid she would disappear. "I'm never letting you go," he whispered against her hair. "Never." And Isabel believed him, because that night, under the storm that still fell outside, they had become something more than husband and wife by contract. They had become intertwined souls, forever. The weeks following that stormy night were the happiest Isabel had ever experienced. Cole was different, lighter, more present, more human. He laughed more often, touched her whenever he could, and looked at her as if she were the only thing that mattered in the entire universe. The mansion, once cold and impersonal, had transformed into a home, a refuge. But happiness, Isabel would soon discover, was fragile. She was in the kitchen, drinking tea in the morning, when she felt the first wave of nausea. She ran to the bathroom, her stomach churning violently. When she finally calmed down, she looked at herself in the mirror, her face pale, her hands trembling. And then she realized her cycle was late, very late. Her heart raced. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and scheduled a doctor's appointment, telling the driver it was just a routine checkup. She didn't want to alarm Cole, not until she was sure. But when the doctor confirmed it, when he smiled and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Walker, you're pregnant," Isabel's world stopped. Pregnant. A baby. Cole's baby. She left the clinic in a trance, her hands instinctively going to her still flat stomach. There was life there. A life that she and Cole had created together. She should have been scared, and she was, but above the fear was something stronger. Joy, hope, love. She could barely wait to tell Cole. When she got home, the mansion was strangely quiet. Isabel found Cole in the office, sitting behind the mahogany desk, his face dark, his eyes fixed on the computer screen. There was a tension in his shoulders she hadn't seen in weeks. "Cole," she called softly, entering the office. He looked up, and something in his gaze made her stop. It wasn't the warmth she'd grown accustomed to seeing. It was coldness, distance, and something that looked dangerously like anger. "We need to talk," he said, his voice controlled, but there was steel underneath. Isabel's heart sank. What happened? Cole spun the laptop toward her. On the screen was a series of photographs. Isabel looked and felt her blood freeze. They were photos of her, with a man. Brandon Sutherland, one of Cole's business rivals, someone she had met only once briefly at a social event. In the photos, they were at a cafe, talking. In one, he was touching her hand. In another, she was smiling. But Isabel remembered that day. Brandon had approached her when she was alone, saying he needed advice about a gift for his wife. She had been polite, nothing more. The touch? He had reached to catch her cup when it almost fell. The smile? It was courtesy. But in the photos, it looked like something else. "Cole, this isn't what it looks like," she began, her voice trembling. "Isn't it?" He cut her off, standing from his chair. "Because to me, it looks exactly like what it is. You meeting with my biggest rival behind my back." "It wasn't a meeting," Isabel protested, taking a step forward. "He approached me. I was having coffee alone and he showed up. We talked for 5 minutes at most." Cole let out a bitter laugh, without humor. 5 minutes, of course, and you didn't think it was necessary to tell me?" Isabel stopped, realizing he had a point there. She should have told him, but it had seemed so insignificant at the time. I should have told you," she admitted. "But it didn't mean anything, Cole, nothing." "Then why is he touching you?" Cole pointed at the photo, his voice rising. "Why are you smiling at him like that?" "I was being polite," she shouted back, frustration exploding. "Is that what you want? For me to be rude to every man who crosses my path?" Cole came around the desk, approaching her with firm steps. His eyes were dark, stormy, filled with pain, disguised as anger. "I want you to be honest with me," he shouted. "I gave you everything, Isabel, my name, my home, my heart, and you—" His voice broke. "You do this?" Tears burned in Isabel's eyes. "I didn't do anything. Cole, you have to believe me." "How can I?" he asked, and the pain in his voice was palpable. "How can I believe when the evidence is right in front of me?" "Because you know me," Isabel shouted, tears streaming down her face now. "You know me, Cole. You know who I am." Cole looked away, his jaw locked, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I thought I did," he said, his voice low, dead. "But maybe I was wrong." The words hit Isabel like physical punches. She staggered back, her hand instinctively going to her stomach, where their life, their baby, was growing. She had come home so happy, so full of hope, ready to share the most important news of their lives. And now, everything was falling apart. "Cole," she whispered, her voice broken. I need to tell you something." But he raised his hand, cutting her off. "No, I don't want to hear any more lies." "It's not a lie," she pleaded. "Cole, please, just listen to me." "Get out!" he roared, his voice echoing off the office walls. Isabel recoiled as if she'd been slapped. Tears fell freely now, uncontrollable. She looked at the man she loved, the man whose child she carried, and saw only a stranger. "You never trusted me," she whispered, her voice broken. "Even after everything. You never really trusted me." Cole didn't respond. He just turned his back, his shoulders tense, his hands braced on the desk. Isabel waited. Waited for a word, a look, any sign that the man who held her in the storm was still there. But nothing came. So she turned and left. She climbed the stairs, grabbed a suitcase, and started throwing clothes into it. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the pieces. Tears blurred her vision. Her heart was shattered into millions of sharp fragments. She placed her hand over her stomach. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered. "I'm sorry that your father, that we—" She couldn't finish. The sob tore through her throat. She grabbed the suitcase and went down the stairs. Cole didn't appear, didn't come after her, didn't ask her to stay. The driver waited for her outside, confused but obedient. Isabel got in the car, her eyes glued to the mansion door, waiting, begging for Cole to appear. But he didn't. And as the car pulled away, taking her away from the only home she'd ever felt was truly hers, Isabel held her stomach and let the tears fall. Because she was carrying the child of the man who had broken her. And he didn't even know. Cole stood in the office for hours after Isabel left, staring fixedly at the door through which she had disappeared. The silence of the mansion was deafening, weighing on him like a tombstone. His hands trembled, from anger, from pain, from something he couldn't name. He had yelled at her. He had thrown her out. He had seen the tears on her face and done nothing to stop them. Because he was afraid. Afraid that the photos were real. Afraid that she had betrayed him. Afraid that everything they had built was based on lies. But above all, he was afraid that she didn't love him the way he loved her. He poured himself whiskey, his heavy hand pouring amber liquid into the glass. He drank it all at once, feeling the burn go down his throat, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain in his chest. His phone rang. It was Marcus, his personal assistant. "Mr. Walker, I need to speak with you." "It's urgent," Cole answered, his voice hoarse. "What is it?" "It's about the photographs. I did some investigating on my own." "Sir?" "They were manipulated." Cole's world stopped. "What?" "The photos. They were edited to look more intimate than they really were. I got access to the cafe's security cameras. Mrs. Walker was telling the truth. Brandon Sutherland approached her. They talked briefly, and she left. Nothing more. And sir," Marcus hesitated, "I found out who sent the photos. It was Vanessa Kingsley, in partnership with Brandon. They set the whole thing up to destroy your marriage." Cole dropped his glass. He heard the sound of glass shattering on the floor, but didn't move. He couldn't, because all he could think about was Isabel, her eyes full of tears, her broken voice when she said, "You never trusted me," and she was right. He hadn't trusted her. He had let fear and insecurity dominate reason. He had destroyed the only good thing in his life. "Where is she?" Cole asked, his voice desperate. "I don't know, sir. She didn't take the corporate phone, and the credit card hasn't been used since she left." Cole ran his hands through his hair, pulling hard, trying to think through the panic that was consuming every cell of his body. "Find her," he ordered. "Use every resource we have. Hire investigators. Do whatever it takes. Just find her." He hung up the phone and ran to her room. The closet was open, clothes missing, the bed still made. Her scent still lingered in the air, flowers and vanilla, and it almost brought him to his knees. He sat on her bed, his head in his hands, and for the first time in years, Cole Walker cried. He cried for the woman he had lost, for the love he had destroyed, for the trust he had broken, and he swore that if he got a second chance, he would never let fear win again. It took 3 days to find her, 3 days of hell. 3 days without sleep, without eating, just searching. Cole had mobilized his entire network, every contact, every resource, and finally, an investigator located her in a small town in the countryside, hours away from the city. Cole didn't wait. He got in the car and drove. Drove as if his life depended on it, because it did. When he arrived in the town, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a peaceful place, simple with cobblestone streets and colorful houses, so different from the world of steel and glass he knew. He found her sitting on a bench in the central square, looking at a fountain where children were playing. And when he saw her, his heart stopped. She looked different, thinner, her face pale, but there was something else. Her hands were resting on her stomach, protectively, instinctively, and Cole knew. He crossed the square in quick steps, his heart beating so hard he felt it in his temples. When he stopped in front of her, Isabel looked up, and what he saw there almost destroyed him. Pain, hurt, but also love. There was still love. "Isabel," he said, his voice coming out hoarse, broken. She didn't respond, just looked at him, her eyes full of unshed tears. Cole fell to his knees before her. There in the public square, surrounded by strangers who stopped to watch, he fell to his knees and began to cry. "Forgive me," he begged, the words coming out in sobs. "Please forgive me. I was an idiot, a coward. I should have trusted you. I should have believed in you, and I didn't, and I destroyed everything." Isabel closed her eyes, tears silently streaming down her face. "Cole, I love you," he said, gripping her hands tightly. "I love you more than anything in this world. More than my company, more than my pride, more than my own life. And I choose you, Isabel. I choose you every day, forever. Please, please, give me one more chance." Isabel opened her eyes, looking at the man kneeling before her. The powerful CEO, the Iceman, now broken and vulnerable. "You hurt me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You hurt me so much, Cole." "I know," he said, his voice full of pain. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to fix it. Trying to be the man you deserve. Please, just give me a chance to try." Isabel looked down at their intertwined hands, and then, slowly, she placed his hand on her stomach. Cole frowned, confused, and then he felt it. Or maybe he just knew. His eyes widened, his mouth opening in shock. "You're—" He could barely form the words. "You're pregnant?" Isabel nodded, tears falling freely now. 2 months. I was coming to tell you when everything happened." Cole looked at her stomach where his hand was resting, and something inside him broke and reassembled at the same time. A baby, their baby. He was going to be a father. "Oh God," he whispered, more tears streaming down his face. "Isabel, I didn't know, I never would have—" He couldn't finish. He just pulled her into a desperate embrace, holding her as if he would never let her go again. "Forgive me. Please. I'll make this work. I swear. I'll be the best husband, the best father. I'll prove to you that you can trust me." Isabel held onto him, her body shaking with sobs. She was still hurt, still afraid. But when she looked into his eyes and saw the genuine regret, the desperate love, the promise of change, she knew she had to try, because she loved him. Despite everything, she still loved him. "Stand up, Cole," she said softly. "People are watching." But Cole didn't stand. Instead, he kissed her stomach, then held her face and kissed her. A kiss full of regret, promise, and unconditional love. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "And I love our baby. And I'm going to spend every day proving it." Isabel touched his face, wiping the tears with her thumbs. "Then prove it," she said, her voice still fragile, but there was hope there. "Prove to me that there's still love here, that there's still an us." "I will," he promised, and she believed him. Because sometimes love is worth a second chance. Sometimes love is worth fighting for. And sometimes love is found in the broken pieces, reassembled stronger than before. Cole didn't return to the city immediately. Instead, he rented a small apartment in the countryside town, a few blocks from where Isabel was staying. Every day, he woke up early and went to her door, not to pressure her, but to show he was there. Present, committed. He brought breakfast. Flowers picked from the garden of the lady who lived next door, books he thought she would like, and every day Isabel opened the door a little more, allowed him back into her life a little more. At first, the conversations were tense, full of uncomfortable silences. But Cole was patient. He listened to her talk about her fears about how she felt when he didn't believe her, about the loneliness that consumed her during those 3 days. And he didn't defend himself, didn't try to justify, just listened, apologized, and promised to be better. Slowly, the walls began to fall. One morning, Isabel woke up feeling intense nausea. Cole was there, holding her hair back while she vomited, gently rubbing her back, whispering comforting words. When it finally passed, he helped her lie down, brought fresh water and dry toast, and stayed by her side until she fell asleep. "Thank you," she whispered, before closing her eyes. "Always," he replied, kissing her forehead. He accompanied her to every doctor's appointment, sat beside her, holding her hand while the doctor talked about prenatal vitamins, developmental milestones, and precautions. And when they saw the baby for the first time on the ultrasound, a small pulsing form on the screen, its heart beating strong, Cole cried, "That's our child," he whispered, amazed. "Our baby." Isabel looked at the screen, then at Cole, and saw the pure love in his eyes. And something inside her healed a little more. When Isabel entered her 6th month of pregnancy, her belly was visibly grown, round and beautiful. Cole couldn't stop touching it, talking to the baby, kissing the stretched skin. He bought books about fatherhood, set up a crib in the apartment, even though Isabel still hadn't decided if she would return to the mansion, and decorated a corner with soft toys and colorful mobiles. One night, while they were sitting on the couch, Cole with his head resting on Isabel's lap, he felt a movement beneath his cheek. His eyes widened. "Was that the baby?" he asked, amazed. Isabel smiled, placing her hand over his on her stomach. "I think he wants to meet you." Cole sat up, his eyes shining. He placed both hands on her belly and waited. And then he felt it again, a small but unmistakable kick. "Hello, little one," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "It's me, your dad. And I can't wait to meet you, to hold you, to protect you from everything. I promise I'm going to be the best father you could have. I promise." Isabel felt tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from something pure and beautiful. Hope, love, family. "Cole," she said softly. He looked up at her, vulnerable, open. "I want to go home," she said. "I want our baby to be born at home." "With you?" Cole's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I'm sure." The return to the mansion was different. It was no longer cold, no longer impersonal. Cole had transformed one of the rooms into a complete nursery. Walls painted soft blue, a hand-carved wooden crib, shelves full of children's books, and a mobile of stars that glowed in the dark. "You did all this?" Isabel asked, amazed. "I wanted it to be perfect for both of you," Cole said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her stomach. "I wanted it to be home." And it was. When the contractions started, it was 3 in the morning. Isabel woke Cole with a gentle touch on his shoulder, her voice calm despite the pain. "Cole, it's time." He jumped out of bed as if he'd been electrocuted, his eyes wide. "Now? Already? Okay, let's go. Where's the bag? Where are the keys? Breathing. Are you breathing?" Isabel let out a laugh between contractions. "Cole, breathe. I'm fine." But he was in total panic, running back and forth until Isabel grabbed his hand and pulled him close. "Breathe with me," she said, and he obeyed. The delivery was long, painful, exhausting, but Cole didn't leave her side for a single second. He held her hand, wiped the sweat from her forehead, whispered words of encouragement when she thought she couldn't go on. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You're the strongest woman I know. You can do this, love." And she did. When the baby's cry finally echoed through the room, filling every corner with new life, Isabel and Cole cried together. The doctor placed the baby, a boy, perfect and small, on Isabel's chest, and she held him as if he were made of glass. "Hello, Eli," she whispered, the name they had chosen together. "Mommy and Daddy love you so much." Cole touched their son's tiny face, tears flowing freely. "He's perfect," he whispered, amazed. "He's absolutely perfect." Eli opened his eyes, grey like his father's, and seemed to look directly at Cole. And in that moment, Cole knew his life had changed forever. That everything he had fought for, everything he had worked for, everything he owned. None of it mattered as much as this little being in his arms. "I promise," Cole whispered to Eli. "I promise I'll always protect you, love you, teach you to be a better man than I was. I promise." In the months that followed, the Walker mansion was completely transformed. There was laughter echoing through the hallways, toys scattered across the living room, the smell of baby powder and milk mixed with fresh coffee. And every night, Cole read poetry to Isabel while she nursed Eli in the rocking chair by the fireplace. One night, as rain gently beat against the windows, echoing that first night when everything had changed, Cole stopped reading and looked at Isabel. "Thank you," he said softly. She looked up, confused. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance. For forgiving me when I didn't deserve it. For giving me this." He looked at Eli, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "For giving me this family, this life." Isabel leaned in and kissed him softly. "You earned it, Cole. You proved it, every day. Proved that love can be rebuilt. That trust can be restored." Cole nestled her and Eli in his arms, the three of them together, complete. "You still make me tremble," Isabel whispered, echoing the words she had said long ago. Cole smiled, his lips touching the back of her neck. "And I always will," he replied. And so, under the sound of rain and Eli's heart beating softly, they remained. No longer two strangers bound by a contract, but a family, partners, lovers, accomplices, forever. Cole and Isabel proved that true love isn't born perfect. It's forged in the cracks, in the mistakes, in the second chances we dare to give. What began as a cold contract transformed into flames that warmed two lost souls. They learned that trusting is an act of courage, forgiving is an act of strength, and loving, truly loving, is choosing the same person every day, even when everything seems lost. And maybe that's the greatest lesson, that sometimes love isn't found in perfect promises, but in promises remade, in the hands that hold tight even when everything shakes, in the heart that beats stronger precisely because it's been broken. And you? Have you ever had to rebuild something that seemed lost? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing you stories that move you.